Alright guys, I'm going to try to go over this as quick as possible so I can try to keep the video under 10 minutes. I'm on Reddit. This is a guy, his name is Ponatron. He data mines info. If you don't know what that means, data mining is something that a lot of us will use when we do builds, because theory crafting only gets you so far, but actually knowing 100% what something does and how to figure out its damage means you are 100% correct in the end. Uh, it's for getting the absolute correct info, not as much theory crafting. It's to wrap things up, make sure, they're 100% correct, like I just said. So, I just want to let you know real quick, I'll leave the links in the description. Here's all your damage types. Big misconception a lot of new players always come at me with is, why you put armor piercing on? The weapon's armor ignore. Alright, armor piercing is like an elemental damage, just like anything else, like fire and electric. Just because a weapon's armor ignore doesn't mean you won't do damage with armor piercing. Armor piercing is usually great against most enemies. Now, the way it works is you have weapon types, weapon damage types, and then those weapon damage types have attributes. So basically, like, this is your armor ignore. Poison, serrated blade, and physics impact. Physics impact would be like Necro's soul punch, your Paris, so bolt weapons, twin gremlins, Paris, those are physics impact. That's all armor ignore. Poison, armor ignore, like the acrid. Serrated blade, that's armor ignore and triple damage against infested. It's got two attributes. And regular old blade is just ×3 against infested, not armor ignore. So an AP is generally armor ignore, but remember, for infested, you only have a 0.5 multiplier, so you only do half damage. So for light infested, you're going to do less damage. So basically, these are your armor ignore. Serrated blade, physics impact, poison. That's what you always want to look at for armor ignore. And unless you're doing light infested, though, armor piercing is going to be great because of the huge multipliers the enemies have. And until you get up in the really high level enemies, armor is not going to take too much of your damage away that it's going to matter. So here's all your different damage types. Also, I can't break them all down, it's too much for a video. And this is your calculation equation you need to do to know exactly how much damage you're doing. So write this down if you're someone that wants to know. It's damage times 100 divided by 100 plus armor. So how do we get that initial first damage? Alright, this is going to be the last part of the video I'm going to explain. So before I get to that math, really quickly, this part of Wiki is now more correct than ever. Wiki is now using Ponatron's data mine info, whereas a month or two ago they didn't, and they actually had a lot of wrong info. So here you go, you could check this all out. So I kind of back up what I tell you in my build videos. Here's infested, here's fire. 2 times damage, 2 times damage, 2 times damage. Ancients, 2 times damage. Fire is your best. AP, only half damage. Half damage, half damage. Not good. Corpus, AP, 2 times damage. Electric, 2 times damage. It's AP and electric, really good. Grenier, and this isn't a total breakdown of it. This is that's why they call it vulnerabilities at a glance. It's to give you a general idea, which is all you need being a new player. Grenier, 1.5 multiplier for AP. Fire and electricity, 1.25, just like I said. Now, back to getting your exact math. How do you figure out a mod's damage? Before we talk about total damage, how do we figure out just the mod's damage? So let's say your weapon does 100 damage, and let's say we're not using serration, but you do need to add that in there. Well, okay, let's say we are using serration, fine. Let's just say, serration's at 100%. The calculation is, you take your weapon's damage times any mod that ups your base damage. So a Bane mod or Serration or Hornet Strike, ones like those. And then you times it by your mod. So if it was a secondary weapon and it was an AP mod, you'd be at 90%. Most of them are at 90, some are 60, but mainly you're going to be at 90. So you times it by 90%, and then lastly, you times it by the multiplier for where you're shooting them. So if you shoot a crewman in the head with AP damage, or you shoot him in the head and you have an AP mod on, you have to times it by a 2 times multiplier. So to make this very easy to understand, I'm not even going to put in, Hornet Strike, or Serration or whatever. Let's just say we're using a secondary weapon that does 100 damage, and we're talking about an AP mod. How much damage do I do when I shoot a corpus in the head? You take 100, which is the weapon's base damage, times 90%, which is how high your AP mod goes up to, fully ranked, times 2. So 100 times 90% is 90. 90 times 2 is 180. So you would have 180 AP damage. Now, for your total damage you do with your weapon and the AP mod, you got to factor in body part multipliers. Now, don't get lost here. This is still very simple. It's just like damage multipliers. Body part multipliers are a multiplier that you have to factor in for wherever you're shooting on the body for your overall damage. And remember, bullet damage does 0 against crewmen in the head. Remember that. So let's say, once again, we're shooting a crewman in the head with an AP mod on. All we have to add in now is another times 2. So 100 base damage from your weapon times 90% AP mod, giving you 90, times 2, because AP damage does 2 in the head, so that's 180. And now times it by 2 again, because that's the body part multiplier. So 180 times 2. There's your total damage. This is how you work it out for everything. Now, if you're using Hornet Strike in, just do the math at, let's say Hornet Strike was at 160. Your math would be 100 for the weapon damage times 160 for Serration. And if there's a Bane mod, you need to times it by 30 for the Bane mod. Then you times it by 90% for the AP mod. Then you times it by, you got your 2 times multiplier for shooting him in the head, and then you have another 2 times multiplier because you shot him in the head. So it's more math, but it's still pretty simple math. And once again, this doesn't really matter if you're a newer player. This is for people that gotta know, their damage and stuff. And last thing to mention, once you got your total damage, you have to add in armor. Armor doesn't matter a lot till the enemies are higher level, and if you're shooting a weak spot of an enemy, like Corpus in the head, Moas in the midsection, Ancients in the inner right thigh, you're going to do full damage, so you need to take armor out of the equation. That's another thing that might throw you off. You need to know that. But when armor does matter is Grineer. Grineer don't have weak spots. You're never going to do full damage unless your weapon damage type is armor ignore. You'll do double damage if you shoot him in the head, but there's still still a damage reduction due to armor. Corpus, if you don't shoot him in the head, you'll have less damage reduction because they have less armor compared to Grineer usually, but you're still going to have some. So anyways, getting off topic here. Here is the calculation. Use what I told you before, but now times it by 100 and then divide it by 100 plus armor. That gives you your actual real damage you just did to that target. You need to know what the armor is, though. This is another thing that's going to make things hard. And you're not going to need to worry about armor that much unless it's like Grineer or a Corpus Tech, which have a lot of armor, or an Ancient, and you're not shooting them in the weak spot. And if they're like, let's say 50s and up, that's when the armor starts to get kind of heavy, like it starts to matter more. That's when you lose a lot more damage. Before that, it's not as big of a deal. But Ponatron on his site somewhere here, I don't have time to explain it all, but he shows how armor scales with enemies, because the way it scales is as they go up in level, you get more armor, and you need that armor value to complete this equation. And that's basically all I got for you. That's the most basic way I can explain everything. If I try to go into too much more detail, you're just going to get confused. So I hope this you understand this all. I try my best to explain this. I'm not the best at explaining it, but generally, I've hit everything that you're going to need to know. If you have any questions, just please message me. Comment, like, subscribe. Check out my new Twitch, links in the description. Sorry the video is kind of long, but it's definitely something. These are things you're going to want to check out. I'll put all the links in the description, and stay tuned for a video where I'll show you where all the new mods drop. And that video is going to be a lot shorter, trust me. No crazy math and stuff. I'll also going to explain shred in that video, because that's a hot topic with a lot of you guys wanting to know, why don't I use shred and this and that. So I'll catch you guys later. Peace.